Have you found yourself navigating a dark night of the soul? Are you craving a deeper connection with the divine feminine? Are you ready to integrate the balanced union of the masculine and feminine within? Then let's get started on the journey towards wholeness to reclaim your sovereign soul. My name is Cynthia Clark. Over the past several decades, I have undergone many dark nights of the soul. My healing journey has been a reclamation of my sovereign divinity. Whether you're just starting out on your self-healing journey or have been exploring techniques for many years, Discover Divinity offers an opportunity to uncover the new possibilities for discovering and reclaiming the innate wisdom within. It is time to discover the new possibilities. It is time to discover you. What if your anxiety, hyperindependence, or obsessive thoughts weren't personality quirks, but trauma responses? In this episode, Safety from the Inside Out, PTSD, Trauma, and Returning to the Body, I am joined by a fellow Rapid Eye Technician, Desarae Walker, for a conversation that is deeply personal and profoundly important. We are talking about PTSD, trauma that hides in safe places, and so many different types of trauma that creates the nervous system's role in our healing journey. This episode is for anyone who has felt stuck, disconnected, or like healing is just out of reach. We unpack the science, the soul, and the practical tools that bring the body back into balance. You will hear our personal stories and the wisdom we've gained through the years of both our professional work as well as our lived experience. This is not just about coping, it's about reclaiming your peace, presence, and your sovereign soul. Let's get started. Welcome to the Discover Divinity podcast, Reclaim Your Sovereign Soul. I am your host, Cynthia Clark, the founder of Discover Divinity and discoveringdivinity.com. This podcast is a space for those of you who are walking through that dark night of the soul and are ready to rise. Together, we are going to be exploring trauma healing, nervous system regulation, and the integration of our masculine and feminine energies and this remembrance of our innate wisdom that we've always carried within us. Today's episode is one that is both grounded and sacred. It's both clinical and it's deeply intuitive. I am joined by the incredible Desarae Walker. She is the founder of Rest for Your Souls, where she assists individuals in realigning spirit, soul, and body by addressing pain points that keep people stuck in unwanted patterns and symptoms while inducing rest and relaxation to promote self-healing. She goes beyond the surface symptoms by getting to the root, using modalities such as neurofeedback, vibroacoustic therapy, the emotion code, rapid eye technology, and reflexology. She is a certified emotion code practitioner, life coach, reflexologist, and master trained rapid eye technician. Desarae understands the importance of self-care and that you can only heal in the states of relaxation. Her personal and professional experience includes working with abuse survivors and the neurodivergent population for over 14 years. So welcome to the show, Desarae.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about being on here today.
Yes, I'm super excited too. And just so that the audience gets a little bit more context of how we know each other, we actually got to meet in a Rapid Eye technology training. And so it was really fun as we were getting to know everyone. We were known as the feet girls, basically. I was one of the foot zone therapists and you were the reflexologist. And so when we first got to got to the property and we're going through training, that's how everyone identified us. And so it's been super fun to think back on that time that we spent together, but also watch our journey moving forward and where we're at today. So welcome.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for having me.
Today, we are going to focus on 5 things. We're going to be talking about trauma and those aspects that actually lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. And some of the things that we talk to you about may actually surprise you. You may actually have some of those symptoms that you've never recognized within yourself. Second, we're going to talk how trauma hides in high functioning behaviors like overachievement or emotional numbness. Then we're going to be addressing the physiological role of the nervous system and how it impacts that trauma storage. Number 4, we're going to weave in how intergenerational trauma lives in our biology and our cells. And then number 5, most importantly, we're going to be sharing some tips about how you can safely reconnect to your body and your power. Because you and I have been through our own deep stories, work in the field of trauma healing and therapy is so important to the both of us. And I believe that after we've both kind of gone through these dark nights of the soul, that they have been those catalysts to bring us into the field that we are in. And so I'm going to give a brief description of what Rapid Eye is, and then if there's anything you'd like to add, Desarae, go ahead. Rapid Eye is super powerful, and it is non-invasive. This is what I love about Rapid Eye, is that we do not have to go into the trauma and relive it. Our bodies have already gone through the trauma. And so this process is a safe way of releasing trauma, stress, and our limiting beliefs without needing to go through that pain again. And it mimics the natural eye movements that occur during REM sleep. And we actually do this when we're awake. We gently stimulate the brain and the body to release the stored trauma on both a conscious and a subconscious level. And what I love about Rapid Eye is that it works with the entire mind, body, energy system. It's a whole package, and it addresses the emotional, the energetic blockages at a cellular level. And for many of us, especially trauma survivors, this kind of bottom-up healing is absolutely essential, and it's safe, it's natural, and it just doesn't help you cope. It helps you reclaim that freedom. So, Desarae, I would love for you to share a little bit about your personal journey, if there's anything else you would like to add about Rapid Eye, and also maybe part of the catalyst that led you into this sacred work.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so they actually both go together. So I guess I'll just tie them in together because I do love Rapid Eye as well. And so I kind of had a dark night of the soul around 30. About 30, 31 was the age where a lot of my trauma started coming up. I had blocked out a lot of my trauma on a conscious level, but my body remembered it, my spirit remembered it, my subconscious remembered it. And so I found myself at 31 wanting to like kind of go check myself in somewhere and check out a life, because it was just really that bad. My PTSD it was uncontrollable. We'll just put it like that. I remember sleeping with knives under my bed. I couldn't be trusted around guns. And so, but that was my way of staying safe. And so it was pretty bad. It triggered a lot of my sexual abuse as a child that I had forgotten about. And I remember sitting in Dr. Diller's office, my first therapist, and I was scared to tell her stuff because the code of trauma is you don't tell people. You don't even talk about it, right? And so here I was, and she was pulling it out of me. And I finally, at that time, remembered my sexual abuse at age 15, which is probably my first dark night of the soul, was at age 15, was sexually abused by someone I went to high school with, didn't tell a soul. I remember being in so much excruciating pain because of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't tell anyone. And that's the part of trauma. You don't talk about it. You don't tell people.
Mm-hmm.
You just pick up and go. And so I remember, so we'll fast forward back to 31. So at 15, that happened. And I'm in my therapist's office, and I finally realized what he did. It came out of my mouth that he sexually assaulted me. And I remember having this somatic experience, and my entire body just felt like an 18-wheeler hit it. Like that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably, and so um she really helped me work through a lot of my trauma. And finally she was like, you go get your own wings and fly. And I was so scared, didn't know where to start, but I did some research and found out EMDR is great, right? So I was doing EMDR on because my insurance at the time covered it, Medicaid covered it, which was really cool. So I was doing
Mm-hmm.
that, and then Medicaid dropped me because I got equity from the divorce. And I was like, I need this. I was like, I need something like EMDR. And everyone I called, it was so expensive. So I had
Mm-hmm.
finally called someone in Utah who was doing it long distance, and never turned back. I said, whatever she does, I want to do it one day. And
Mm-hmm.
that was how I became an RET tech, was just seeing how much healing RET helped with my trauma and get me out of that PTSD. Because when it would hit, the only two things that would help me were RET and
Mm-hmm.
reflexology. That was it,
Mm-hmm.
because my nervous system needed to come back to some type of homeostasis. And as you probably already know, you have to deal with it on a somatic body level. You can't just
Absolutely.
talk through it. You can't just, work through it cognitively. And don't get me wrong, like, therapy was great. I think it helped me. It had its place, but my body still was remembering everything. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was how I got into RET. And everything I use with my clients is something that helped me at one time to, rewire my neural pathways, because the brain is wired for good or bad. And I was wired for anxiety, stress, trauma, you name it. So I
Mm-hmm.
really had to go in and rewire those neural pathways, which is what RET does a great job at doing, and
Yeah.
neurofeedback and different things.
Yes, and I really just honor you and thank you for being so vulnerable by sharing your raw truth, because I believe as we share our truth and we share some of those dark night of the soul experiences, that it can give others that courage. And especially with sexual trauma on many different levels. I love that you pointed that out. Is this really is an epidemic when I look at my own personal life, connection to my loved ones, and what happens in especially family dynamics, but also cultural dynamics of that unspoken shame or unspoken protection of an abuser, and then how a victim will get shoved under the rug or pushed to the side. And this is my intention as we do start to speak up about trauma, is that we can bring up more of an awareness so that people realize that these things need to be talked about. They need to be addressed. We need to, if in certain circumstances, go to an authority so that things can be taken care of. But so many people suffer in quiet for years and years and years. And so thank you for being able to vocalize that, because I really feel like that's going to give other people courage, and also like bringing up those parts, of trauma that I've experienced for myself. I feel like the both of us have gone through different things up to this point, to help us be really good practitioners, because we didn't just go and do a certification. Like we've actually lived the
Yeah.
depths of what it feels like to have panic attacks and debilitating trauma impacting the body. And just like you said, honing in on the somatics, honing in on reminding the body, reminding the brain that it's safe, and allowing it that ability to come out of the trauma response is so important. When I was little, like, I didn't realize like some of these symptoms that we're going to get into were due to nervous system dysregulation, going through grief, confusion, being called too sensitive, right? Too emotional, high strung, etc. And so years ago, when I was first doing my trauma work, I had worked with EMDR therapist as well. One of the books that I read was called Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. It was actually one of the pieces of work that actually started to crack my world open to start to realize how incredibly important it is for us to look at the impact of early childhood trauma. This is where I get super passionate about that, because I did lose my father at an early age. And according to my family, you know, they thought, oh, well, she's young, right? She's young. She doesn't remember him. She'll be fine, right? And it just, as an adult perspective, people weren't educated back then to realize how deeply that would affect me. And when I finally opened that door to look at the grief, to start to look at my nervous system and step into the trauma healing, was when my body started to heal. And so what I love about Levine is that he says trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. So yeah, beautiful. I recommend any of the audience members out there that Peter Levine's work is incredibly beautiful, but it can also be triggering. So I'm going to put a little bit of a warning that for someone who is in a deep trauma response, there's a lot of case studies, and so some of the work is not always the easiest for someone who is in a highly responsive state to read through the entire work. But I just wanted to put up that trigger warning, but especially for practitioners, especially for those of you that family members that may be helping people through trauma. His work is incredible. And when I learned the different stages of trauma, that was one of the most validating things for me. Going through what I did. So I knew that, okay, this is an actual visceral response to what happened to me. And so being able to know that that's a pathway to safety is being able to first understand what's going on in our body is hugely impactful. And so if it's okay with you, Desarae, before we began, we were talking about maybe getting into the different types of trauma so that our viewers can understand what it is, the different types, and then we'll get a little bit more into that PTSD. Does that sound good?
Yep, that sounds awesome.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to run it down as a list, and then feel free to interject anything that you would like. So the first thing I'd like to address is there is acute trauma. So that can just be one single distressful event. Maybe there's an assault, maybe an accident. Something that is chronic trauma is something that's ongoing. It's an exposure over and over and over to a stressful situation. This may be abuse, this may be neglect. Then we're moving into third, we have complex trauma, which is multiple or compounded interpersonal traumas, and they often start in childhood. Next, we move into developmental trauma that occurs during a critical growth stage in early life. We also have intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, and this is the type of trauma that is passed through family systems and collective memory. So even though you may not have experienced the trauma yourself, because someone in your ancestral line did, those stories get recorded in the DNA and the cells. We also have relational trauma. Those are wounds that are caused by close personal relationships. Next, we have betrayal trauma. This is trauma that is caused by someone or something, maybe an organization or a system that you deeply trusted, which can then lead into the next one, which is religious or spiritual trauma. This is damage from a fear-based or oppressive belief system. We have emotional abuse that can include neglect, gaslighting, or chronic emotional invalidation. Sexual trauma, and this is any non-consensual or violating sexual experience. There's physical abuse, which is harm to the body through violence or intimidation, and medical trauma, so traumatic experiences with illness, surgery, or healthcare settings. I'll expand a little bit more on early childhood trauma, but Desarae, would you give a little bit more context if you'd like to add to maybe the ones that I've already addressed? And then I know you wanted to address another type of trauma as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll probably start with intergenerational just because that's kind of like my niche right there. Like I deal with a lot with my clientele. I'm like, it didn't start with you. I mean, a lot of people come in and they think it's my issue. No, that started 10 generations before. And unless you're working with someone like a practitioner and or a modality that can get to that level of generational trauma, you're going to repeat it and replay it, in each lifetime, and each person is going to replay that, if you will. The child, it'll somehow creep up in the child or the grandchild, and so with that one's really, really tough. I just recently finished reading My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem, and it was a tough read, because my grandmother picked cotton. And my great grandmother, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure she was born a slave, and so it was in my bloodline. And there were just things that I had to really sit with from my African descent, but then also from my Latina descent, who were highly racist, and not, trying to figure out where I fit in as this person who had this generational trauma. And it was tough. I will tell you, anytime you're dealing with, trauma that came before you, preconception, historical, generational, that's a heavy weight to carry in many ways. And so I just wanted to kind of add that, to know it didn't start with you, but it can end with you. And that was part of why I do what I do, because I said, I refuse to pass this to my children. I refuse to allow my children to go through the abuse and to go through, all the stuff that many of myself and my ancestors went through. So I wanted to touch a little bit on that. And then also the sexual trauma. I think a lot of times people don't realize it's sexual trauma, and or they don't want to admit it, if that makes sense, because so for me, when I was 15, he did not use his male reproductive organs. So I never in my head thought, well, he didn't do that, or it wasn't as violent. It's, and so you kind of minimize it on so many levels. And so and to kind of backtrack on that, I had both my children at home because I would not let anyone touch me, like below the belly button. Like I couldn't. So I had both of my children at home. My midwife knew, like, let me just have this baby. And if I need you, you come get me. Right. But that was also my trauma response. And it was in her office that I finally realized I had trauma, because she goes, I think you have trauma. She goes, because she asked me the question. She says, have you had sexual trauma? And my first answer was no. And she goes, no is not, you can't answer no. She said it's either yes or I may not remember. And I sat in her office and I had to say, I may not remember. And that's the thing with sexual trauma or any type of abuse, but especially sexual, because you try to block it out to survive. And so you have men and women in their 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s finally having that trauma come up. And to kind of backtrack just a little bit, Cynthia, looking back at my dark night of the soul, I just remember saying, God, I can't deal with this. I want to be out of here. I can't deal with this. And I want to just encourage people that if you are having that trauma come up, it's because it's ready to heal. And at the time, I didn't have that knowledge, right? I just wanted to escape. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't have the support system. I didn't have the money. I didn't have anything to help myself to get the healing I needed. And it wasn't until my naturopath taught me how to muscle test. And she said, go buy the emotion code book. And because at the time I was broke, my ex-husband had closed down the accounts, had no money, and that was my lifeline. I literally, so I want to encourage anyone, if you've had trauma and it's coming up, find something, even if it's real simple, to try to help yourself heal, because that's how I started my business. Everything I do now was because I was doing it at some point to help myself heal from the abuse and trauma.
Yes, it's so interesting as you're speaking. Like I remember that the first time I ever bought Brad Nelson's book, The Emotion Code, and like I mean, so beautiful and so helpful. And in society, we've been so taught to just be at this surface level, pull your bootstraps up, like move on. And this is so generational that
Yes.
even in the school systems, we've never been taught how to lean in and listen to our bodies and the messages that are coming up. And that's why I feel like it's my mission on the planet to stand on, a soapbox or something and shout it from the rooftops to say, you don't have to stay here forever. And that's the thing is I think people sometimes fear what is coming up, but the thing is
Yeah.
it's already coming up.
Yeah.
We as facilitators just get to teach you safe and non-invasive ways to allow the body to release it, because trauma is something that we don't mess around with. Trauma is something so real and something so valid, and especially for these deep dark corners of trauma, being able to have a safe haven and a safe support system and a safe catalyst is so vital to the process. And so we're definitely going to be sharing with you tips and tools, but this is very much so something I would invite you to definitely reach out to either Desarae or I to be able to support you if you are feeling like you are just in that space where it is desperate. It is in this space like you're just like, I don't know if I can get through this. This is where we can facilitate such a safe, effective way that you don't have to go back and relive it. It really is a beautiful process, but I think a lot of times people fear those uncomfortable emotions, but there's such freedom when we finally give ourselves permission to feel the anger as it's coming up, feel the grief, feel the sadness, feel that pain. And when we can facilitate it to move, it's so freeing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can I add just a little bit on that?
Of course.
I love what you said about like, we have to reteach our bodies, our brains, our spirits to feel safe again, because that's what trauma takes away. Trauma takes away your fundamental right to choose, and that feeling of safety. And some of us, we came into this world not feeling safe, and so we're really having to teach ourselves to be safe even when we don't feel safe, and retrain the nervous system, so that we are, and have those tools, whether you're there, I'm there, or whomever is there, so that we can self-regulate and calm ourselves down, because triggers are going to happen, in life, whether we like it or not. We can try our best to avoid them, but that's not, that's part of the healing process, is having those triggers and working through them in healthy ways, and having support during those times.
Yes, absolutely. And I loved that you brought up the intergenerational trauma, because at least with my personal experience, it's been interesting. I had never realized that even if it didn't happen to you, like it is possible for you to experience flashbacks. And that was probably something that was very odd for me, to be experiencing a flashback of one of my ancestors. Like it wasn't even mine, but to realize, wow, like this is something that my body has been holding on to, and watching that come up. And so to know that if you ever have been in that space where you are experiencing flashbacks, we're going to talk a little bit about PTSD, that not only can it come from your own lived experience, but it can weave into these cellular DNA structures. But then also, we were having a conversation, you had mentioned something called secondary trauma. So do you want to maybe expand a little bit on secondary trauma, and feel free to talk about any of the other types of trauma as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. So secondary trauma is basically where you witness it, or, even as a bystander, you don't even have to like be in the same house or anything, but, maybe you witnessed an accident. I mean, I've had trauma from just watching an accident happen, seeing someone get hit by a car. Um, I My background is in intimate partner violence or domestic violence, and so just imagine, all the children who are witnessing a parent get beat up, right, or a parent go through some type of abuse, and so them also feeling helpless. One of my professors was saying that children actually have a worse time um, uh, getting over watching the abuse because it's kind of like on a reel, when you see that person getting attacked versus if they were getting attacked themselves. And not saying one is less or better or anything like that, but what they found in one of the studies she was mentioning was that children who witness abuse actually, it's as if they were just getting abused themselves as well.
Exactly.
And yeah,
Exactly.
and they have that kind of double abuse because now they've seen it, not only they're not experiencing it per se, but they've seen it and it's kind of on a replay. And so um that right there, to me, I'll be honest with you, I think that's the one that people, not only just myself, but a lot of the people I work with, they will downplay. They go, oh, well, I survived it. Oh, it was my mom that got beat
Mm-hmm.
up, or oh, it was this person that got beat up. Not, it was my, but it's like, if you witnessed it and you were, even if you heard it, you may not even seen it with your own eyes, but even just hearing maybe, someone else getting beat, that can be very traumatizing. And that's what
Absolutely.
secondary and vicarious trauma is, and or
Mm-hmm.
people who are working in the field of helping. Maybe it's an EMT or a firefighter or a police person, a police worker. And so those things, like people who work in those fields, you really got to do self-care, 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 and I'm
Yes.
pretty sure you can attest to that. I
Yes.
think that any person who has been traumatized, whether you work with traumatized individuals or you've been traumatized yourself, that's how you take your power back, is self-care. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I will be honest with you, that was one of the hardest things I've had to do, was doing self-care while broke. Okay.
Yes.
It's
Absolutely.
not fun. Okay. Like I said, I went from being married to a single mom who, just pretty much didn't have much of anything. And I had to build myself entirely up. I lost a lot of my support system, by divorcing, and leaving the church that my ex-husband and I went to. And so it was, like I said, I've dealt with the spiritual, I've dealt with a lot of the trauma. And so I just want to encourage anyone who does not have the funds, I don't want to say broke, but may not have the funds to go and
Mm-hmm.
get a session. Do what you can. Like, look up videos on YouTube on, maybe breathing exercises or anything that can really help you. And that is where you're going to find your purpose and passion a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
is going out and seeking what resonates with you so that you can heal, because you're going to one day help someone else heal.
Absolutely. And I have a couple of things I would like to know in what you've
Mhm.
talked about. And on that last note, that is why I offer the Discover Divinity community classes. I offer the podcast to be a way for people to get education so that they can empower themselves. And also, in one of my other episodes, I had talked about the emergency process that we do through Rapid Eye. Spoke with our one of our directors at the Rapid Eye Institute and made sure I got permission so that I could share that emergency process with my audience. But I'll go ahead and I will link that in the comments so that you have something that's effective no matter where you're at. Absolutely, I'm going to encourage you to reach out and do the session work, because it is so worth it to come back into those parts and pieces that you can truly just allow the brain to come into a space of letting go. And when you were talking before about the secondary trauma, that's also something, especially with like parents who have had a child go through something, that's something to pay attention to. Or just like you were saying with the intergenerational, I would have to check on the status of what the exact science is. But when you think about a female and her mother and her grandmother, I believe it is when the grandmother is born, or in the womb, she's actually has ovaries that are so many generations down the line. So whatever your grandmother or great grandmother went through, all of those stories are in her ovaries, passed down through the generational lines to all of the females. And so regardless of whether you went through that or not, know how deep this really does go. And so the story of your grandmother, Desarae, like you were a part of that
In many
because
ways, yeah.
you were a part of her. And I look at the story of my grandmother and the deep things that she went through and some of the things that I've experienced in present day healing through trauma. And I just, that's why I do feel so incredibly passionate about this, is because it's difficult, it's hard, but knowing that we have hope, we have an ability to be able to rise through that. Like, I am not discounting the hard, because I have been through some of the hardest things I just look at some of these dark night of the soul experiences, and I know you feel it too. And sometimes you just feel like you're never going to get out of that. But being able to use these modalities is so important, so that the brain can actually finally let go of that. I would love to address just a little bit one more type of trauma, if that's okay. Because it, just like the intergenerational trauma that we're both so passionate about, early childhood trauma really was that first catalyst for me, because I just could not understand with the loss of my father. When my mother found my dad, she was holding me. And it's been interesting as I have done some of the work that I have, having some of those memories come back to me later on in my life, where I may not have remembered them early on, but I always felt this missing or this longing or this grief that I could never ever explain. And so being able to get to the place in my adult life where I recognized, I had someone actually point that out. They had asked me directly, they said, "Have you ever grieved your father's death?" And I was like, no. Like, I never had the opportunity as a child to, I didn't even go to the funeral. When we got through I was little, so I was off at a babysitter's, and I think, wow, like as a little one, I never got that closure. And so when I started to do grief work for my father, for that experience with death, I started to uncover all of these scientific stacks of evidence that helped me finally understand what was going on with my body, along with Peter Levine's work. But many people assume that because babies and toddlers don't have the ability to form conscious memories, that trauma experienced in these early years won't affect them long term. But because of this research, we find a different story. The first 3 years of life are such a critical period of brain development. And it is, during this time, this is when the brain is growing rapidly, and it's forming essential circuits that regulate emotions, stress responses, and social connections. And trauma in these early stages of life, whether it's abuse, neglect, abandonment, whether it's death or a parent leaving or inconsistent caregiving, this disrupts healthy brain development. And elevated stress hormones like cortisol that flood the brain then interfere with neural growth, and it alters the structure, the wiring, the areas responsible for emotion and learning. And so even, just the brain aspect of it, trauma can profoundly affect a baby's sense of safety and attachment. And so they rely on their caregivers, not just for their physical needs, but to help them regulate their emotions for stress. It's called co-regulation. And so if you, as any audience member, if you experienced early childhood trauma, you may have never learned how to co-regulate. And especially with my mother having gone through the trauma as well, losing her husband, trying to take care of her children, it was an interesting dynamic to then move forward in that life without nervous system regulation. And so what happens is the body learns that being in that fight or flight is normal. And so growing up in my life, that was the way things were. And it's almost as if I didn't know life any other way than being in the hypersensitive space. And so with toddlers, with babies, even though they don't remember that the way the older children do, they're encoded in the body and the behaviors, just like we've talked about those ovaries, we've talked about the cells, we've talked about the DNA. And so it can expand into a host of symptoms. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but physically, early trauma can dysregulate the immune system as well, which is really interesting for me. Is then as I went through the stages of my life, I ended up getting diagnosed with 5 autoimmune disorders. So it's been really interesting to find the correlations, the pieces, but then also come through that to rise above that and heal. So the good news, is later on in life, sometimes it can be a little challenging. We have to work with rewiring neural pathways that are definitely wired for decades being a certain way. But if we can, it is possible. We can go back and we can change those stories. We can change that impact. But for those of you that are connected to young ones, intervening for little ones, young children is so vital because their brain and bodies are shaped by these experiences before they can even talk about it. So I feel super passionate about all of these. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the different types of trauma that we've addressed?
No, not right now. I did want to piggyback on a couple I did want to ask though, because I remember when we met at the Institute and you told me you overcame 5 autoimmune, and that was something that my son was dealing with. And so you gave me so much hope. I just want to say that, Cynthia. And I hope and pray that this gives someone else who has gone through trauma hope as well in overcoming, autoimmune, because a lot of times trauma is intricately linked to trauma. Autoimmune is intricately linked to trauma. I forget where the study came out of, but it said that if you came through a high conflict divorce, a child was 3 times more likely to get type 1 diabetes. Wow. And I forget the name of the study, but I could probably pull it up if I really needed to. But it was astounding because I was living through that as a mother who went through a pretty, high conflict divorce, right?
Yes.
With my ex-husband, and then my son getting diagnosed at one point. And so that was really tough to, because it's like, man, I thought I survived. I thought we survived. And then it was like, boom, all over again. You know what I mean? And so can you share, though, if you don't mind, what autoimmune diseases they were? I'm just curious, and I'll share a couple more things I thought of.
Yeah, gosh, I felt like I just kept checking one after the other. And many times when we get into autoimmune diagnoses, it can get a little bit tricky because so many of them piggyback off of each other. Yeah. And my advice for anyone that is dealing with the components of autoimmune is to get back to the root. Like, try not to get caught up in the diagnosis, because by then, by golly, I had all kinds. Lupus was the main one, and then I had several others that were piggybacking on the main lupus diagnosis. Okay. And so for me, some of the best advice that I had been given, especially, gosh, this was decades ago, was instead of using the word, oh, this is my disease, right? My whatever, my anxiety, my lupus, my diabetes, or whatever words you want to fill in if you're dealing with a disease, is to not take ownership of that disease, because it is not you. All it is a host of symptoms giving you a message that there's something deeper going on. And so when we work with autoimmune, typically what we're looking at is we're looking at that deep root of inflammation on a physical level. When we look deeper than the root of inflammation, that's where we get into some of these other aspects of traumas or past layers that are connected into the genetics, the DNA codes. And that's why I feel so passionate about what I do, is because I truly experienced such a great miracle. And when I finally got to that space in my life that I could speak up and I could use my voice for that little one, you know, that little babe, the 20-month-old baby, that was one of the greatest gifts I ever gave her, was to finally speak up for her. Because with my dad's death, we didn't talk about it. It was really just kind of a, we don't talk about Bruno. It was not a comfortable topic, and my mom remarried, and so it was as if everyone had just moved on from their lives. But with someone who had experienced the impact, the implications of early childhood trauma, it was as if that storm was stewing, and with no ability to process my emotions, no way to speak about that, or to even understand what was going on in my physical body with the symptoms that we'll get to in just a moment. It was, I think about like a little storm inside of almost like a mason jar, just stirring and stirring and stirring and stirring with nowhere to go. And so when I finally got into these layers and levels of healing modalities, it was if I like finally was able to unscrew that top of that mason jar and allow these parts to finally come out. And as I released those toxic aspects, I released those layers, my body healed. I lived some of the most incredible years of my life. And this gives us a full, example. And there's so many other people that have examples like this. But when we have something physical going on in the body, we must look at it mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically.
Absolutely.
And that's why we work on a whole level, right? Yes, and it's so powerful. And so when a couple of years ago, this is when I was getting ready to push live on my podcast, I had been faced with some layers of trauma, and a layer of trauma that I had not expected, some layers that came through intergenerational, some aspects of trauma that had hit through my family, also my personal experience, but then years prior having experienced religious trauma. And so it was interesting to watch my experience these past couple of years. It was one of those other dark nights of the soul to go, oh my goodness, like I've got to be able to look at this. This is present. This is trying to give me a message, give me a voice to say, okay, where do we go from here? And it's been really, really interesting. Like I said, having those parts of Rapid Eye as well as other modalities be able to help me address it, and to give it just loving care. It's been another layer of myself being able to use my voice, to be able to speak up about very serious things. And so even when I talk about trauma in general, like it's something that I feel very, very sensitive about, because it's something that I've experienced and it's deeply personal. And so this is why we can no longer live in an epidemic or the plague of silence. Like, this is probably one of my main messages of today, is that we are able to use our voices to allow
Yeah.
these parts of ourselves to heal. That
Oh,
every single part deserves it. Every single part.
oh, oh, wait, Cynthia, I just love you. I'm seriously, like, this is why we connected. Like,
Exactly.
this is like the feet women, and thank you for sharing that because, like, that's what trauma does. It silences your voice. And
Mm-hmm.
I tell you, the 40-year-old Desiree is loving on that 40-year-old girl who lost her
Yes.
voice and couldn't say anything, and she has a
Yes.
voice now. And I tell you one thing, Cynthia, I ain't shutting up. Okay. I'm not doing
Yes.
it. And
Yes.
thank you for sharing that because that's so empowering to like
Mm-hmm.
know you have a voice and you're heard and you don't have to shut up when abuse happens. Right.
Yes.
Um, and I wanted to just share a little quick plug for the feet people. And mainly
Yes.
why I loved, why I went into reflexology, and I'm sure why you went into foot zoning,
Mm-hmm.
was that it works on the nervous system. It's not
Mm-hmm.
massage, it's not a foot rub. It works directly with the nervous system and the nerves in the body because there's
Yeah.
so many nerves on the bottom of the feet. And so I remember, Cynthia, when I would get so like stiff, my whole body would get stiff. I'd go get a reflexology session right at the mall, and I would go, my
Yeah.
body could relax finally. And
Yes.
so thank you for sharing that. I did want to share a couple things, if that's okay
Of
with you,
course.
Cynthia. Just kind of listening to you about the grief and what you went through as a 20-month-old baby, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
even understanding anything. And I just want to encourage people to grieve that
Mm-hmm.
because your body, your mind, your body, your spirit will grieve it when it's safe to. And I will tell you, Cynthia, I think I've done more crying like 38 plus than I've probably ever done in my life. And I really thought
Absolutely.
like something's wrong with me, right?
Yeah.
But I was grieving, relationships, divorce, people, I mean, I was just grieving it. And, although they had not had a death per se, they were still living, but I still had to grieve that, right? And so I just want to encourage people like let the tears come because I'll be honest with you, it was not safe for me to cry growing up. So I didn't cry a lot. I didn't want to cry a lot. Crying was a sign of weakness, and I wanted to be strong because I didn't want anybody taking advantage of me. And so I am finally able to really cry and like allow, giving myself permission to cry because I never, was able to. I had to, like get out of the divorce, run and keep going, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I wanted to say. And then also just to kind of talk about how a quick story about how kids or babies can remember trauma. So I shared a little bit of how my naturopath taught me how to do muscle testing. Well, I had the book, I was muscle testing, and one night I could not figure out how do I clear this emotion of anxiety. It was in
Mm-hmm.
utero. And I am sitting there. So I just start praying. I'm just like, God, you've got to show me because I want this anxiety gone. I've dealt with it my entire life and I want to get to the root. And the first thing that came to my mind was a gun. And I thought, oh man, did somebody shoot someone? I come from
Yeah.
a rough background. And so,
Mm-hmm.
long story short, came back that my mom almost witnessed someone commit suicide.
Wow.
And I thought, I'll tell you, Cynthia, I thought I lost it. I was like, this stuff doesn't work.
Right.
I've lost it. My PTSD has gotten the best of me. Drove down to Denver, sat my mom down. I was shaking. Okay. I was shaking because
Yeah.
everybody thought what I was doing was weird. But I sat her down and I said, hey, mom, did this person, because I even had the person's name down, and she looks at me with big eyes and she goes, how do you know that?
Yeah.
And I was so afraid, Cynthia. I mean, I told her God, mainly because it was, right? I prepare and I was scared, like, what was she going to think of me?
Yeah.
Um, but it was at that moment that I realized that trauma, even before you come out and you can speak or think or whatever, it can affect you tremendously years down the
Absolutely.
line. And that was when I said, I am going to become an emotion code practitioner because I
Yeah.
said, if I dealt with that, someone else is dealing with that. And I
Yes.
want to help them. And one of my
So
mottos is
powerful.
you do not have to talk about your trauma or relive it to heal it. You
Yep.
don't have to. And that's why so many of my modalities that I use does not require you to talk about it because
Yeah,
talking about it can be can be traumatizing all over again.
absolutely.
And so it's
Yeah.
just now that I found my voice to even talk about some of the stuff I've actually
Hmm.
went through.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not un unnatural. I mean, I even found myself this morning, even I told you a couple years ago, I had some of this other trauma resurface years after I'd experienced religious trauma. And even today, there are these moments where you may have a flashback, right? And we're going to get into the PTSD symptoms. And this morning, I was like, oh, I have this memory popping up. And it was in that moment that I just had to allow myself to feel those emotions for just a moment, allow myself to cry, to feel angry, and then use the modalities, use the tools that I have to help my body work through it so that I can bring my body, bring my brain back into the present moment to remind my body, I'm safe. I'm here
Yep.
now in this moment. I'm not back in that experience. And
Yeah.
and that's, I think, where I would like to maybe go to is to point out some of those symptoms, right? Because years ago, when I was experiencing, before I grieved my father's death, I was having 10 to 15 panic attacks a day. And so that, I have lived panic. My therapist at the time was like, wow, like you're my poster child for anxiety because you have all the symptoms. And so I was like, I don't know if I should like be proud of that because I'm the poster child. That's what he called me, was his poster child, because I had all the symptoms. But panic attacks is one of those number one symptoms for PTSD. Did you want to talk about any of the others?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's talk about it. So I will say like having a somatic experience as if it just happened. Because a lot of times when that trigger comes up, it's as if it just happened. And I'll just go back to the example of when I was sitting in my therapist's chair and I remembered my sexual abuse. I mean, literally, it felt like it had just happened. My
Mm-hmm.
whole body ached. My reproductive area, literally. I mean, I remember her having to call my sister into the therapy session because I
Mm-hmm.
I I was that triggered, Cynthia, that I was like, I'm about to go roll up on someone and I'm about
Yeah.
to go cut them because they didn't trust me with a gun, but I had knives and I was like, listen, I come from people that will shank you. And so
Yeah.
I literally did want to go to Denver and find him and
Yeah.
slice him, so it was that real. So I think just questioning what, like, if you do have a body pain, like asking where is that from, that's usually a
Mm-hmm.
trigger. Having those like night, sorry, sleep is really tough
Mm-hmm.
for trauma thrivers, survivors, right? Because a lot of times that's when the triggers will come up when you're sleeping. So sometimes you can't sleep through the night. Maybe you might have the nightmares, which is one of the reasons why I love Rapid Eye, because it's helping the body to give that same release that you get at the end of a REM sleep cycle, and you dispel that trauma versus keeping it in the
Mm-hmm.
mind or the body system. Um, Trying to think of some other ones. I'm kind of drawing a blank there, but
Yeah,
if you
well, I
have
mean,
any
I
other
think
ones.
even just feeling like out of body, like how many
Yes,
times, like I would just feel it's kind of like almost like a brain fog, or almost feeling like you're not in your body, you're disconnected.
yes,
A lot of times when someone has a trauma response, that's the only way that when your body is so dysregulated, you feel like escaping. And it does. You
yes,
can feel totally disconnected, maybe emotionally distant from people. Some people can feel completely numb. Other people can feel completely emotional, right? So either way, there's no right or wrong. It just depends on how your body is dealing with it. But then there's also sometimes maybe that hypervigilance where it can start to create symptoms maybe of like obsessive compulsive tendencies or control tendencies, where things have to be like in a certain order, a certain way, or maybe getting to like overachievement, right? Like
yeah,
feeling like you have to be in this perfectionistic wheel. And that's why I don't think that trauma is always super recognizable. Yes, panic attacks. Yes, flashbacks, but when we get into some of these more discrete symptoms of
yes,
PTSD, some people don't. realize that because they've been so normalized, right? To be like the people that go, oh, I'm so OCD. And I'm like, oh, if you only knew what OCD was. I'm like, this is
Yeah,
just not about order. Like
right.
with OCD, those are very huge trauma responses to the way that the body has been affected. But there's all kinds of umbrella diagnoses. And just like autoimmune, how I was talking about, like if we can get down with autoimmune down to that inflammatory root, and then beneath the inflammatory root, we can get into those programs, those ancestral roots, those belief systems. The same goes with maybe any diagnosis that someone's had, or some of these symptoms is beneath the surface. If we can get into those inner child wounds, if we can get into intergenerational trauma, this is where we're going to have our most effective emphasis, right? Like if we can really get down into those roots, it's huge, because the body can finally let go.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree. I don't know if you could probably put it up or do a link, but I love the iceberg analogy.
Yes.
PTSD is that, that tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
But everything underneath it, that's what's going to cause the ship to sink. And that
Yes.
is what you have to get to. You can't just deal with what's on the surface, right? And
Right.
so I think that is so important to look at where it came from, and and really dig into that, because that's where the true healing is going to come.
Yes. And being able to get that nervous system out of
So,
the fight or flight, right? It's like working with the autonomic nervous system when trauma has occurred, or those memories start to come up, just like we were talking about. It's something that may have happened so far back, but when it comes up, it feels as real as if it was happening in that moment. And
right.
so if we could, we really have got to start to teach the body those
Absolutely.
tools. So,
Yeah. And to just piggyback on that real quick, Cynthia, your brain's number one duty is to keep you safe. It may not
mm-hmm,
seem rational. It may not, seem plausible. It is meant to keep you safe. So that's why a lot of times people will fawn, because in that situation, if
mm-hmm,
fawning is safer for them than, punching someone and running, that's what they're going to do. Right.
yeah,
And so something that Resma Minikin says in his book, he says, um, trauma responses are not logical, and I
mm-mm,
think for so many years, Cynthia, I beat myself up because I thought, well, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I punch him and run? Or why did I break a window? So
yeah,
you kind of shame yourself for your responses. And so
mm-hmm,
I just want to encourage people, to get out of that shame and blame, and just allow yourself to say, this is what happened to me, and heal from there.
wow,
Um, I think that one of my newest favorite things, I know I might be kind of jumping the gun, but one of my newest favorite things to do, Cynthia, is to go sauna bathing, which they actually say
love
is
that.
great for PTSD. So when my
Mm-hmm,
body gets, because the brain, like I said, the brain, it'll be something that, you know, I was having fun with, and then a trigger hits and my body is out.
yeah,
My body is out. And going and sitting in that sauna and just relaxing and just allowing my body to go, I'm safe, I'm
yeah,
here, I'm in the present, I'm not back when I was this age. That is so, so important to do, is to reteach ourselves that safety and interrupt the
yes,
patterns. Because, like I said, if you're on that neural pathway for panic, you've got to interrupt it. And that's how
yes,
you create a new neural pathway, is when you keep
yes.
interrupting, you learn something new versus always known to do.
Yes, and I love that you've pointed out like letting go of the shame, the judgment toward yourself. Like that's huge in just being able to say I did the best that I knew how at that time. And you just get to love on that part of yourself, to say
Yeah,
I am here for you, whatever that experience was, to say I'm here for you. I've got your back. And here we go, right? Like we're stepping into just really coming into that vagus nerve and
absolutely.
bringing it back into rest, digest.
Yes. Yes.
And it's huge. Like I love that. I when we were exchanging notes earlier, I had read that you called the vagus nerve the soul nerve.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's
And I
what I
love
got that
that.
from
So,
Resma's book. Yeah, but yes,
yes.
I
Oh, that is
love that he calls
beautiful
it a soul move.
explanation. Like
Oh,
that is so beautiful because that's where like if we can really get back into that vagus nerve work, that's where the healing comes when we can finally just
absolutely,
listen into that body. It's huge. And so along with
absolutely.
that sauna, um, there were a couple other things that you wanted to share to be able to work with tools for the audience today. Do you want to go ahead and share those?
Yeah, so I'll probably just go over a quick vagus nerve reset just because it's easy. You don't necessarily have to have any tools with it. And you always have your hands for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And I usually like to use a sparker just because we are pretty energetic beings. We need, and it can kind of spark the vagus nerve a little bit. But one way you can do a quick reset, it's kind of like a shortcut of a reset to the vagus nerve, is just rubbing behind the ears and then just gently pulling down. And that will help reset the vagus nerve. And I do it 3 times. So I just gently rub. And I usually take a nice deep breath because it's already resetting. Um, and you just kind of drag it down to the collarbone, but just 3 times behind the ears and going down. And that's one way that I can reset the vagus nerve and not look too off in public. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh,
So powerful. It
so
seems so simple, but it
right,
works every time. Like I love such a simple tool.
right,
So
just
that's
something
great.
very simple that you can do.
Yes. I love that. Anything else that you wanted to share as we are like wrapping up as far as tools go for the audience?
I think I'm going to leave it there. I mean, there's probably more I can really talk about, but I don't want to overload anyone. And, if anyone wants extra tools or videos, I am more than happy to send those out because I'm such a visual learner that I'm like, let me
Yes.
see how that goes. How do you do the tapping or how do you do the rubbing? And so if anyone does want any
Yeah.
additional, information, I'm more than happy to send out some videos or give you information or, shoot you in the right direction,
Yes.
if I'm able to.
Yes, and if you have any links or anything that you'd like to share, I'll share that in the podcast episode as well. If you
Okay.
have anything that you are saying, oh, this would be great for the audience, feel free to send that my
Okay.
way. But I think just stepping into those really simple techniques are a great way to start the vagus nerve reset that Desiree shared. I love the sauna. That breath work, just breathing in itself, is so, so powerful. But then I'll also share that emergency process, like I said,
Yes.
in the comments before. And there's a host of information that really helps you bring yourself into that space of calm, whether it's with nature or tuning into your 5 senses. But I think just coming into the space of awareness, just recognizing that this happened to me, but it doesn't necessarily have to be your story for the rest of your life. This is something that you can change, and so I really appreciate you, Desiree. Thank you for sharing your truth, your tenderness, these corners, because like I said, this awareness that we're spreading out into the community, this is empowering. And so I would love to leave that door open if there's anything else you would like to share as we're closing up. But I just really appreciate you.
No, I just thank you for having me, Cynthia. I think this is great. Like I said, I'm hoping to offer hope because, like you said, that's I think with trauma you lose a lot of hope. You lose a lot of the sense of who you were before it happened.
Yeah.
Or maybe you never even knew who you were because you just, it was just trauma after trauma after trauma. And so
Mm-hmm.
rediscovering, which is discovering divinity, right? That
Yes.
who you were created before you even came on this earth. You know what I mean? And discovering who that is, and that is just what I want to leave off with.
Beautiful. Well, I again appreciate you so much. This has been so fun to bring together our passions and our deep desire to be able to bring change to the world. And to all of the listeners today, I would love to leave you with this. If you are moving through your own dark night of the soul, or you've experienced trauma of any kind, and if you're trying to understand why you feel stuck, or why you still can't relax, or why you keep looping through old patterns, please, please hear me. You are not broken. You are awakening. And these beautiful, beautiful messages are here because they're ready to heal. And what the world often calls too sensitive or too emotional or too much is often the language of trauma that is waiting to be alchemized. And as you are moving forward on this path, it's not about numbing it or ignoring it or pushing through it, but in turning inward with reverence. And we talk about reclaiming sovereignty on this podcast all the time. And today's message is to understand that's not about power over anything. It's coming back to that truth of who you are. Just like Desarae was saying, when the protective layers get to fall away and we get to step into healing. And the journey is one of integration, bringing in that sacred union of the divine masculine, the divine feminine energies back into harmony within you, and being able to step into a space where we stop competing and we start collaborating within ourselves. Yes, you were never meant to just survive. You were meant to remember, to reconnect, and to rise.
Yeah.
If this conversation moves something within you, I invite you to pause, breathe, feel what landed, maybe write it down, maybe share it with someone you trust. And if RET or some of the somatic practices that we've spoken to you about speaks to you, check the show notes for those referrals. We have resources waiting there for you. And remember, you're not behind. You're not too late. You're exactly where your soul needs you to be. And until next time, honor your nervous system, reclaim your body, and rise into your divine sovereignty. Thank you for listening to the Discover Divinity podcast. If this podcast resonates with you, I invite you to check out discoveringdivinity.com. You will find resources to reclaim your sacred, sovereign spirituality. Here, you can join the Discover Divinity community, where we have free online community classes, as well as done-for-you courses and programs. Navigating the unique personal path to wholeness can feel overwhelming at times. If you would like further support or are ready to take your healing empowerment to the next level, I offer one-on-one intuitive sessions in a variety of different packages where we will discover, release, create, reclaim. Discover your innate wisdom that lies within. Release the imbalances that prevent you from living your truth. Create harmony in body, heart, mind, spirit, energy, and relationships. Reclaim your sovereign soul. It is time to discover new possibilities. It is time to discover you.